The first time I noticed the gas station on Route 19, it looked like a mirage. A lone island of light in a stretch of nothing, fluorescent tubes humming steady above pumps older than my parents. The sign read Earl's Fuel and Service, letters crisp as if they'd been painted yesterday. I pulled in out of habit, watching moths bump the glass like trapped stars. Inside the booth, the attendant raised a hand in greeting. His blue uniform was spotless. The years had stretched him thin, but hadn't dared wrinkle his face. On the counter behind him sat a framed black and white photo. Grand opening, Earl's Fuel, 1971. The man in the photo smiled next to a pump. The man in front of me smiled the same way. Not older, not different, exact. He said softly through the glass, "Evening, traveler. Been a while." My stomach turned. I'd never been here before. I've driven the back roads between Mason County and Lake Cartier so often, I could probably steer the route blindfolded. For the last 6 months, I've been under contract with a small regional magazine documenting Forgotten America, the diners, motels, and dust-bitten miles that vanished when the new expressway stole the traffic. Most nights, the road feels like a museum exhibit, everything preserved in quiet neglect, frozen in fading colors and rust. Route 19 has always unsettled me. Its pavement feels too smooth, its reflective lines too bright. Town legends claim the original road was rerouted in the 70s after a chemical spill, but no one remembers exactly where the spill happened. Farmers avoid talking about it. Truckers call it the Echo Stretch. I figured it was ghost story fodder shoved between advertisements for barbecue. Until last week. My editor forwarded a reader email, unsigned, no return address. It read, "If you want to see a piece of history that never ended, stop at Earl's. Ask him what year it is. Stay until you believe him." The coordinates were hand-typed.
At first, I laughed it off. Plenty of gas stations reuse old signage for nostalgia branding. Still, on my next assignment, I decided to take the old 19 instead of the interstate, just to add color for a travel piece. The notebook in my passenger seat was half filled with highway trivia and half-hearted sketches of roadside motels. But after 30 miles, the world emptied. Only dark forest shoulders and the stripe of asphalt ahead remained. When the glow appeared on the horizon, clean white stacked above warm yellow, I almost sighed with relief. I slowed at the bend, headlights sweeping across the station canopy. No movement, but the doors gleamed as if freshly polished. A hand-painted sign said, "Open 24 hours since 1971. I killed the engine, listening. Somewhere beyond the trees, a nightbird whistled, off-key and metallic. A breeze carried the sharp scent of gasoline, mixed with something sweet, the chemical sweetness that clings to antiques. I told myself it was just another curiosity for the article, but some part of me, the instinct your body still whispers from shared evolutionary memory, already wanted to keep driving. The bell above the door jingled with a tone too pure to belong to metal, a chime built for a world where things never rust. Inside, the air felt different, thicker, like it had been inhaled and exhaled too many times by the same walls. Behind the counter stood the man whose photo I'd seen in the cold open. His posture was perfect, like he posed for invisible customers lined up through decades. Earl, polished metal letters shimmered on his chest. He looked around 70, but his eyes were the ageless kind, unbothered by years because they no longer counted them. When the glow above the door jingled with a tone too pure to belong to metal, a chime built for a world where things never rust. Inside, the air felt different, thicker, like it had been inhaled and exhaled too many times by the same walls. Behind the counter stood the man whose photo I'd seen in the cold open. His posture was perfect, like he posed for invisible customers lined up through decades. Earl, polished metal letters shimmered on his chest. He looked around 70, but his eyes were the ageless kind, unbothered by years because they no longer counted them.
"Evenin'? A fill-up?" "Half tank," I said, handing over a card. Earl didn't reach for it. Instead, he pressed a button on a cash register the color of mint toothpaste. The drawer slid open with a sigh and a faint puff of warmth escaped, smelling like burned ozone and old receipts. "It'll take cash," he said. "Machines can't read what time you're from." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He didn't. Through the window, fuel gushed with impossible quiet. No pump whine, just a vibration in my jaw like distant thunder caught behind my teeth. I noticed his radio then, an antique on the shelf, its dial trembling between stations. Out of the static, a voice announced tomorrow's forecast and a headline that hadn't happened yet. "Coastal storm surge expected at dawn. Expect blackouts through Sheffield County." I thought it was some relic broadcasting a rebroadcast. "Nice collector's piece," I said. Earl turned up the volume. "It tells me who's coming down the road." The air conditioning vent above rattled. I could swear the hum modulated into the same tone as the engine idling outside. Everything vibrated together. My pulse, the fluorescent lights, the pump handle, one note holding us all steady. When the meter clicked full, I set the nozzle back. The numbers read $3.19, a price that hadn't existed in 10 years. Earl carefully folded my bills and wrapped them with a rubber band already cracked by age. "Through here you'll find what you're looking for," he said. I frowned. "What do you think I'm looking for?" He met my eyes. "Everyone who stops here wants proof. They just call it different things." His smile was soft, almost kind, and for the first time I noticed faint dust above his shoulders, swirling like shimmer underwater. He wasn't aging, he was evaporating, molecule by molecule, into whatever made the station breathe. When I stepped back out, the world had gone silent. The crickets, the road, even the wind. The only sound left was that steady pulse from the ground, syncing itself to my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which one belonged to me. The next morning, I stopped in the town of Haddon, 8 miles south of Route 19. Typical roadside Americana, a blinking yellow light at the intersection, one diner, one hardware store, and a billboard half peeled to reveal the wood beneath. At Ruby's Diner, the kind of place that smells of coffee grounds and maple syrup cooked into the furniture, I ordered breakfast and mentioned Earl's station to the waitress. The spatula froze in her hand mid-flip. "You mean the old Earl's?" "Old as in historic," I said. Her forehead tightened. "As in gone, burned down before I was born." That ended my appetite. "I filled up there last night." A cook shuffled toward the counter, wiping his hands on a towel that once was white. "Tourist found the glow," he muttered. "Always one every few years." I took a sip of coffee. "Glow?" He pointed with his chin toward a cluttered wall of photographs. Between faded softball team pictures and parade banners hung a Polaroid, the same blue and white station under a summer sun. Fresh paint, balloons tied to the pump. Grand opening, 1971. Standing by the sign was Earl, younger only by the color saturation of the film. "That's your man?" Ruby asked quietly. "Exactly him," I said. The cook leaned closer, lowering his voice. "My daddy hauled fuel up there. Last delivery, he swore the gauge showed the tank bottomless, said you could pour forever and never fill it." A bell rang as someone left a tip and walked out. For a moment, the chatter dipped, leaving only the hum of a refrigerator and the squeak of ceiling fan chains. Ruby refilled my cup and whispered, "If you're smart, you'll take the interstate home. People go poking around Earl's after dark. They don't come back. Or if they do, they can't tell what day it is." I forced a chuckle, but it died in my throat when she added, "Midnight's the crossing hour. That's when he looks for company. Outside, sunlight felt wrong. Too white, too thin." The uneaten pancakes cooled on the counter behind me. Driving out, I slowed by the post office and saw a sun-bleached newspaper pinned in a case marked Local History. July 1974, tragic explosion destroys Earl's fuel and service, one presumed dead. The article was only half visible, but the blurred victim photo showed his smile, identical. As the taillights of my car pulled back onto Route 19, a sign flashed in my mirror. The metal looked newer, freshly installed. "Next service, Earl's Fuel and Service, 0 miles." I drove faster, but the number never changed. I told myself it was last-minute fact-checking, But by dusk the following evening, my car was aimed back toward the Pine Corridor. If you write about ghost towns, you start to half believe that the past keeps a ledger on who looks away too soon. The world dimmed to slate gray, thunder muttering somewhere far off. When the canopy of trees broke, the station appeared exactly as before, lamplight spilling across wet pavement though no rain had fallen. The same moths circled the bulbs in perfect figure eights, as if the night had been put on replay. Earl waited behind glass, motionless. I parked at Pump 2, grabbed my camera, and started recording. The air smelled faintly of motor oil and lilacs, an impossible blend that made my eyes sting. A moth burst against my lens, leaving a powder pattern shaped like a fingerprint.
Stepping inside, I clicked the recorder on my phone. "Evening, Earl. You mind if I ask a few questions?" He lifted one eyebrow. "Interview? Documentation, part of a travel feature. Best make it quick," he said. "Cycles run short after sundown." I scanned the shelves while pretending not to hear that. Chips in paper tubes printed with currency redesigns from the 80s, motor oil with brand logos long defunct, a rotating rack of postcards all showing the same clouds in the same arrangement, like copies from one photograph. "Business steady?" I asked. Earl smiled. "Same faithful few." The register clicked even though no one touched it. A receipt spat out, folded itself, and dropped onto the counter. I opened it. Written across in neat penmanship, "Stop counting miles." Earl watched my expression. "You still believe you came here by road, don't you?" My throat dried. "How else?" He tapped the counter where inches of yellow dust had settled since my last visit, only hours ago by my watch. "Every traveler arrives the way they're meant to. Some by fuel, some by fear." Something behind the wall hummed, low and electrical, like a turbine winding down. The fluorescent bulbs flickered. In their staccato light, Earl seemed to blur, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent enough for me to glimpse the back wall through his ribs. I lifted my camera again. "When did you open this place?" "July 19th, 1971, he answered. "Grand day. They rerouted the highway that same week." "And you've been here since?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze to the far window, where the last sunlight bled out through the trees. "You folks keep coming back because your world runs out. Mine never does." He faced me again. His eyes were glassy, reflecting pump lights that now burned a deep amber instead of white. A clock ticked somewhere unseen, rhythmic, calm. Every tick sounded weaker until it halted mid-beat. Earl stepped from behind the counter for the first time. The air around him rippled, bending the light as though heat rose off his body. "Once you start recording," he said quietly, "you're already part of the archive." My camera screen froze on static. My phone's timer stopped. I stumbled backward toward the door. "See you in the next cycle," Earl called after me. When the door shut, the chime rang twice, once for closing, once for something else I couldn't name. The road outside was empty, yet the fuel pump display still read $3.19, glowing steady against the night. I should have left. But curiosity is a parasite. Once fed, it wraps around your spine. The next afternoon, I returned with a flashlight and the half promise to myself that I was only gathering evidence. One more look, one more note, then gone. The front door creaked open without resistance. Sunlight sliced thin stripes through dusty glass, scattering across the floor. No sign of Earl. Behind the counter, a chrome cooler rattled, leaking cold breath into the aisle. When I pulled it away from the wall, the tiles beneath were spotless, as though scrubbed daily, while the rest of the floor was coated in decades of grime. There it was, a small metal door flush with the wall, stenciled EMP only in block letters that hadn't faded. The padlock was ancient but unlatched, the chain draped more for decoration than security. Inside the handle groove, a faint pulse of cold air moved evenly in and out, like the door itself was breathing. I opened it.
A short hallway led downward, narrower than it should have been, with rough concrete steps descending into faint blue light. My flashlight flickered before I even reached the bottom. The room was small but filled to choking. Workbench, wiring diagrams pinned to corkboard, a dozen wall clocks, all running backwards. Fluorescent bulbs were replaced by glass tubes filled with swirling vapor that illuminated the space like trapped lightning. In the center sat an odd contraption, jury-rigged from a typewriter, a radio, and fuel pump components welded together. A hand-painted plate read, "Repeater Unit 19." Every few seconds, a low thump echoed through the pipes overhead like a heartbeat made of machinery. I brushed the dust from a stack of photographs beside the unit. Each was a Polaroid of cars idling at the pumps, different models, different decades, but all shot at the same dusk lighting, the same sky frozen on the horizon. At the bottom of the stack, one Polaroid made my chest tighten. It was me. Same jacket, same car, standing by pump 2 with my camera raised. The timestamp was July 19, 1974, 9:19 p.m. Footsteps scraped above the ceiling. A shadow paused at the stairwell entrance, blocking the light. "Tour's over," Earl's voice said, calm as ever. I looked at the photo again and felt the paper's edge tremble, subtly alive. When I dropped it, the air gusted, snatching every Polaroid into a spiral that hovered midair before raining back down, blank, all the faces gone. Earl descended the last step, hands gloved in cleaner's towels. "The repeater keeps the fuel stable and the road open," he said, "but it hungers for a witness to keep it running. Someone always wanders in when the cycle nears zero." The machine behind him pulsed brighter. My reflection warped across its metal frame, but in that reflection I saw Earl standing still, and myself still frozen at the pump outside. Footsteps scraped above the ceiling. A shadow paused at the stairwell entrance, blocking the light. "Tour's over," Earl's voice said, calm as ever. I looked at the photo again and felt the paper's edge tremble, subtly alive. When I dropped it, the air gusted, snatching every Polaroid into a spiral that hovered midair before raining back down, blank, all the faces gone. Earl descended the last step, hands gloved in cleaner's towels. "The repeater keeps the fuel stable and the road open," he said, "but it hungers for a witness to keep it running. Someone always wanders in when the cycle nears zero." The machine behind him pulsed brighter. My reflection warped across its metal frame, but in that reflection I saw Earl standing still, and myself still frozen at the pump outside. The rows of reversed clocks filled the room with a sound that wasn't quite ticking, more like rain striking glass from the inside. Earl moved slowly around the repeater unit, adjusting levers that hadn't been touched in decades. "Every system fails if you let time collect," he said. "That's what happened in '74. Timer jammed. Every minute that stuck became another person." His words vibrated in my chest like a second heartbeat. I found a metal ledger buried under a rusted clipboard, its cover etched with "Maintenance Log, 1971-1974. Inside, each entry was finer than the next, neat penmanship, dated perfectly until the final page, which simply read, July 19, 1974. Timer malfunction again, fuel stabilized, no departure until end of cycle, I'll keep the window open. The ink had scorched into the page, leaving a faint chemical scent. "End of cycle?" I asked. Earl didn't answer. The room trembled, light tubes fluttering like lightning trapped behind frosted glass. I paged backward through earlier notes. One described a calibration test, subject 1, self. Below it was a graph sketch labeled cellular clock, hold. "You tested on yourself," I said. Earl glanced over, eyes reflecting that swirling blue light. "You'd rather it be someone else?" The repeater clicked like an engine turning over. Mufflers outside coughed in perfect time, though no car waited at the pumps. "Why keep it running?" I asked. He shrugged. "The network wanted a through road to places that don't exist yet. They built loops, convinced time could refuel the world. But someone's got to stay on shift, keep continuity." He paused, smiling faintly. "That's me. Continuity." I turned a page halfway stuck together. A Polaroid fluttered loose. Grainy shot of Route 19 under thick fog. There's a silhouette bent over the pumps. Earl's uniform gleamed, but beside him stood another shadow, the same height. Mine. Same jacket, same stance. I dropped the file, pages fanned across the floor, covered in overlapping loops, drawn like road maps leading nowhere. Each spiral began at the same dot, slashed with the number 19. Above us, wind moaned through vents like an engine accelerating. Earl shut the recoil lever with a decisive snap, and all the backward clocks froze in unison. "You shouldn't have come this close," he said. "Now you've been printed." "Printed?" He pointed to a small square on the desk. A Polaroid camera clicked by itself, film sliding out. I watched my own face fade slowly into the white, eyes wide, mouth half open, time stamped exactly 9:19 p.m. The paper warmed in my hand, pulsing once. The same warmth rippled under my skin, as if I'd swallowed a spark. The hum of the repeater subsided to a faint purr as Earl leaned against the workbench. Without the noise, it was as if the world itself held its breath. Blue light spilled across his face, highlighting every pore, yet making his eyes hard to focus on. "You feel it yet?" he asked. Whatever this is, the spark?" He nodded once. "That's time noticing you. It doesn't like being watched." I forced a laugh to ground myself. "Look, this is fascinating, sure, but I'm not buying the whole time machine story. There's probably a gas leak down here mixing with my head." Earl's expression didn't change. "If it helps, call it a leak. Just remember, everything leaks one way or another." He gestured to the walls. Under the grime, layers of faded calendars overlapped, 1971 to 2021, days crossing each other like tangled threads. "They sent us a prototype to keep the highway connected," he said softly. "Time skips when humans vanish too fast. The repeater stabilizes frequency, but an operator cells have to anchor it, a living line to recalibrate every cycle." I stared. "So you volunteer to stay trapped here?" "Not volunteer." The faintest crack appeared in his voice. "The test went wrong. The loop froze before reset, and the operator became part of the code." He spread his hands. The skin shimmered like film burning in slow motion. "Every fuel molecule that passes through this pump records data. The breath of each traveler, the heartbeat of their engines. It uses that to maintain continuity." Out of instinct, I stepped farther back. "That's insane. Then why is your watch stopped?" I raised my wrist. The digital display was blank. I tapped it uselessly. "The world upstairs runs by crude rotations," Earl said. "Here, we run by reflection. You use time like cash. I use it like atmosphere. We breathe each other now." He turned toward the repeater, adjusted a dial, and new light filled the space. Not blue this time, but gold, radiant and soft. In that glow, Earl's face appeared much younger, lines erased, posture relaxed. "Every loop, I think maybe this will be the one someone replaces me, somebody who still belongs to time." My mind jumped to the Polaroid stamped calibration number 6, subject 1, self. His eyes met mine like he'd heard the thought. "You came here with a camera. That's how it starts." "No, I'm not staying." He smiled without teeth. "Everyone says that, until the next arrival photographs you." The repeater vibrated, throwing geometric shadows onto the walls. I shouted to be heard. "So, if this thing turns off, will you age?" "Not age. End." He reached out to hand me something wrapped in oily cloth, a wrench older than either of us. "That kills it. Might kill me, too. Maybe it frees the road." For a second, I almost took it. Then the gold light flickered to red. Earl's gaze sharpened. "Or maybe it frees you." The vibration grew unbearable. Lamps on the ceiling bent like heat mirages. My reflection split into multiples across the metal walls. 30 versions of me, each in different stances. Some terrified, one smiling back. Earl's voice threaded through the distortion, calm, deliberate. "We fix machines, not time. But time remembers its mechanics. Wouldn't you rather stay where nothing breaks? The wrench clattered from his hand, ringing like a funeral bell. I turned and ran for the stairs, every backward ticking clock now racing forward, all hands converging on 9:19 p.m. At the top of the stairs, the temperature changed abruptly, too sharp, like walking into the pressurized cabin of an airplane mid-flight. The moment I crossed the threshold back into the store, the fluorescent lights didn't flicker so much as shiver. Their glow twisted through every color and then settled on a shade that had no name, somewhere between mercury and bone. My car sat where I'd left it. The pumps still gleamed, but the fog rolling across the lot glowed faintly from within. Not light reflecting, but radiating, as though each droplet carried its own filament. I took one step forward. The sound of that single shoe landing multiplied into dozens, echoing around me in slow delay, scattered in different tones. Through the office window, I caught movement. Earl, one version of him, stood framed in that same glass, hands on the counter, expression patient. But a second Earl hovered just behind him, face half dissolved into overlapping frames, every blink misaligned by a fraction of a second. The low thrum from below grew louder until the entire building vibrated like an engine straining past redline. The repeater wasn't humming anymore, it was roaring, pitching waves of force that bent objects around me. Bottles on the shelves elongated and melted into strands of amber. The walls inhaled, then exhaled. Somewhere deep inside the noise, I heard words. Not quite speech, more like the suggestion of syllables moving backward. Nin, 9, teen. I stumbled toward the door. Each stride stretched longer than it should. My legs felt trapped between seconds. When I reached for the handle, my hand passed straight through metal, then finally touched solidity again on the third try. Outside, raindrops floated stationary halfway to the ground, glimmering blue, then reversed their paths, rising gently back into the clouds. The scorched rubber smell hit next, followed by a surge of static that lifted my hair. Lines of electricity traced across the asphalt in veins of white flame. A dozen Earls now stood around the pumps, one in the crisp new uniform from '71, another aged and sagging, one with soot streaks across his face as though he'd just crawled from fire. They rotated toward me in unison, speaking together. Fuel's full. Cycle ends at 9:19. The number carved itself behind my eyes. I looked down at my phone. 9:18:47. The seconds refused to advance, hanging there, guttering like a dying flame on a wick. In the reflection on the windshield, I saw Earl raise a match. The versions of him smiled wide, duplicates fading into one figure, composed of overlapping time. When the clock finally clicked to 9:19, the fog ignited, a silent flash that turned the night pure white. For half a heartbeat, I saw every route, every direction, spiderweb together into one endless 19 stretching in both directions. Then darkness fell, and the gasoline glowed blue beneath my shoes. When sound returned, it came all at once. Wind, gravel, the shriek of my own breath. I was standing several yards from the pumps, unsure how I'd moved. My car's engine sputtered impatiently, headlights stabbing through gray vapor, waiting for me like a loyal dog terrified of thunder. I jumped inside and turned the key until it roared. Tires howled. The station collapsed into a blur of blue glow in the mirrors, smaller by the second. But the farther I drove, the less the scenery changed. The forest leaned closer, treetops curving slightly inward, as though bending to watch me flee. My gas gauge plummeted. I'd filled the tank less than an hour ago, or what had felt like one. Now the needle dove for empty and smooth, unbroken descent. The dash clock flickered over and over between 9:19 p.m. and 19:19 in digital confusion. The radio came alive on its own. Grainy announcer voice, cheerful and calm. Big weekend savings at Earl's Fuel and Service, where every fill-up lasts a lifetime. A jingle followed, The same 3 chimes as the shop bell. I killed the radio, heart thudding. Another light appeared up ahead, a sodium glow spreading across the fog. Relief hit first, then dread. The structure ahead had the same geometry, the same neon letters curving in the exact same pattern, Earl's Fuel and Service. I slammed the brakes, gravel fanning out beneath the tires. For several seconds I sat in the dark, pulse echoing in my ears. My rearview mirror showed nothing but trees and ink. I tried turning around. The wheel fought me, heavy, reluctant, as if the asphalt itself tried to steer back. When I did manage a U-turn, there it was again, another station, identical down to the flickering open 24 hours sign. Earl stepped forward into the beam of my headlights, uniform immaculate, hand raised in casual greeting. On the glass door behind him hung a faded poster reading Safety Inspection, July 19, 1974. I pressed the accelerator. The car didn't move. The tires spun soundlessly, engine whining like a trapped animal. Earl began walking toward me, each step sinking to my heartbeat. The odometer ticked backward. My head spun with vertigo, a sick certainty blooming behind my ribs. The road hadn't stretched ahead of me or behind me. I'd been driving in place, Route 19 looping around the station like a record needle stuck on the same groove. Earl stopped at the hood, leaned down, and tapped the windshield with one clean knuckle. His smile was patient. "Out of gas again?" he asked. I tried to scream, but the horn blared instead, long, distorted, warping into the sound of that eternal siren from 919. The first pale light bled across the treetops like a wound seeping through dark cloth. I was slumped against my steering wheel. The horn was silent again, my lungs raw from shouting into nothing. The car sat parked at the edge of an old gravel lot. The station was gone. In its place stood a weed-choked foundation. Rusted fragments of pumps jutted like gravestones. Black scorch marks crawled up what remained of the walls. Morning birds sang somewhere far away, their calls hollow, metallic, like recordings of real songs. I stepped out, barefooted, gravel biting hard. My clothes smelled faintly of gasoline and ozone. On the ground near my tire lay a newspaper, edges stiff with dew. The Haddon Courier, July 19, 1974. The front page photo showed a structure mid-flame, smoke funneling straight into the sky. Caption read, "Explosion claims 1 at Earl's Fuel and Service." Below, a photo, unlined, younger, only because the picture itself was old. My hands shook as I compared the face to the one burned behind my eyelids. Same mole by the lip, same distant smile. I tried calling my editor. My phone found no network. Tried checking GPS. Screen gray, pointer spinning like it had lost north itself. The clock still frozen at 9:19 a.m. Truck engines rumbled in the distance, and relief flooded me. Civilization. But when I waved, the road remained empty, even as the sound drew closer and passed right through. Back in town, Ruby's Diner stood where it had the day before, but the open sign was hand-painted, its neon missing. Inside, only dust and overturned stools. On the counter sat a coffee pot crusted in decades of neglect, beside a sign-in sheet dated March 4, 1976. Every page after that was blank. I turned to leave and caught my reflection in the window. For a blink, Earl's blue uniform replaced my jacket. The name tag read Continuity. Then, only me, drawn and pale, the shape of the repeater room's light hovering faintly behind my eyes. I slumped into my car and whispered at the empty dash. It couldn't have happened. But the air still pulsed with a rhythm just below hearing. Each beat whispered the name of the road like a heartbeat counting down. 19, 19, 19. I drove south until the forests thinned and the land turned to open pasture. At least I thought I did. The road signs grew stranger, names half scraped away, arrows pointing nowhere. My GPS refused to orient itself. Each refresh replaced highways with empty grids. When the first cluster of houses appeared, I nearly wept. Civilization. A group of children were drawing on the sidewalk with chalk outside a convenience store that hadn't been here before. Their laughter stuttered like a skipping record.
I parked and stepped out, legs unsteady from too many miles without proof they existed. "Hey," I called, "where are your parents?" A little girl turned, chalk dust all over her palms. She'd drawn a perfect outline of the gas station. Same canopy, same pumps, glowing in colors you don't find in any box. Beside it, she'd drawn a man in a blue uniform with mirrored eyes. "That's the fuel man," she said proudly. "What's his name?" She frowned as if checking her memory, then smiled. "He says his name is whatever you forget." Her mother emerged from the store with a bag of groceries. I asked the first thing that came to mind. "How long has this place been open?" She blinked. "We just moved here last month. Used to be farmland, no other towns for 40 miles. But I could see, beyond her shoulder, an outline on the horizon. Pumps, canopy, faint amber glow dissolving into daylight haze. I stepped back toward my car. The mother called, asking if I needed directions. I mumbled some excuse and drove away.
A few miles later, something new caught my eye. A road sign so clean it looked newly installed. "Thank you for visiting Route 19. I hadn't entered a highway. I hadn't seen it on any map. Distance markers fell into negative numbers before blinking out altogether. My radio crackled once, and then a familiar voice said, "Cycle stabilized, continuity maintained." I yanked the plug, but the sound bled through the silence, whispering from the vents, the seat seams, the pulse of the engine. The sky ahead shimmered in gasoline colors, and for a breathless instant, I imagined every mile between me and home bending quietly back toward the same invisible point on the road. Weeks passed, or something pretending to be weeks. I sent frantic emails to my editor that bounced back unread, mail delivery failures citing user not found. My apartment felt borrowed, furniture subtly shifted, newscasters repeating the same headlines with different words. Every clock I owned slowed by the minute until each one hovered again at 9:19. So I did what any doomed witness does. I went back. Clouds hung low and amber over the valley. Route 19 was no longer printed on local maps, but my hands knew the turns. The steering wheel tugged gently on its own when I veered too far west, like the road itself was guiding me home. I left a voice memo for whoever might find the recorder. Entry 1, returning to the site known as Earl's Fuel and Service. Objective, to end the loop. If you hear this, don't come here. The landscape blurred until the glow appeared, dull golden, humming softly, as though a beacon pulsed beneath the soil. My headlights cut through fog that smelled of wet metal and lilacs again. The station waited exactly how it always had, neat, untouched by weeds or dust. Every surface glistened with dew that never evaporated. Earl stood by pump 2, hat in hand, smiling like a man greeting a regular.
"Been expecting you," he said. I held up the recorder. "Last time you said I was printed. Can it be erased?" He tilted his head, thoughtful. "Erasure is just memory traveling backwards. You ready to remember forward instead?" Behind him, the repeater emitted a low, aching keen, the sound of every gear reaching its final revolution. He gestured toward the open service bay. Inside, the air shimmered with 1,000 faint reflections, faces flickering in and out, each frozen at the moment of realization. "You called it an engine," I said, "but it's a mirror." Earl's grin broadened. "Same difference. Both need fuel." He extended his hand. On his palm lay the cracked Polaroid camera, lens smoking slightly. Press the shutter. Finish it. The sky above wrinkled, clouds folding inward as though being sucked down a drain. I raised the camera. The image inside the viewfinder showed not the station, but the curve of the road itself looping infinitely away. When I pressed the button, the flash didn't vanish. It bloomed. Light flooded everything, white and silent. Somewhere within it, Earl whispered, "Continuity complete." The shockwave struck without sound. The last thing I felt was pressure in my jaw, as if the world was exhaling me. Then all motion stopped, and the steady tick I'd carried in my chest ceased as neatly as a switch being thrown. They said a trooper found me a week later on an overgrown shoulder off what used to be Route 19. My rental car sat idling beside a concrete pad that looked like the ghost of a foundation. The audio recorder was on the passenger seat, looped on one single phrase. Cycle complete, continuity maintained. Cycle complete, continuity maintained. The trooper's report noted no service station nearby, no power lines left standing. When the tape was analyzed at the county lab, it wasn't analog at all, just a faint hum that traced the shape of a human voice.
That was months ago, or minutes, depending how time counts. I'm dictating this from a safe house office, though the desk lamp hums in the same pitch as the repeater. Every night at 9:19, the light flickers. The same smell of lilacs and burnt metal fills the air. Sometimes, when I call home, the voice that answers sounds exactly like mine and says, "Evening, traveler, been a while." If you're listening to this recording, delete it. If you're reading the transcript, burn it. But if you're driving a lonely stretch of highway at night and see a gas station washing the dark in amber glow, don't stop, not even for fuel. Don't stare at the attendant or glance at your watch. Keep your foot on the pedal and your eyes fixed forward until dawn. Time doesn't like witnesses. And if you ever find yourself waking at 9:19 to the sound of a cash register opening for no one, just whisper you're passing through and never meant to stay. Because every loop needs someone to anchor it, and right now I can still feel the road humming beneath my floor. I think it's calling for relief. I think it's calling for you. If you see that station glow after dark, keep driving. Don't look back, because the next driver who does might just take my place.